All right, so I'm going to tell you a story. You know, I like to tell stories. So there was this preacher who lived in New York, and he was a younger guy, and he was headed down to Texas to interview for a job at the oldest church in this little town in Texas. It was a farming community, and he went in, he interviewed with the deacons and with the board members, and they said, yes, we want you to come. So he called back to his wife, and he said, honey, we're moving to Texas. I need you to get everything together. I'm going to preach here on Sunday morning, so I need you to pack up and move the kids and come join me. And so he sat down and he prepared a message, and he just poured his heart out. And he wrote and he wrote and he wrote and he wrote, and he had about 2-hour sermon. And I don't know about you, but it's hard for me to sit for 2 hours. And he knew that. He said, I got 2 hours here. What am I going to do? And he thought, well, I'm just going to do it. And so Sunday morning comes at 7:30. He gets up. He wants to be the first one at the church. He's there, and he's ready, and he's waiting. And church starts at 9 o'clock, and it's 8:30, and there's nobody there. It's 8:45, and there's nobody there. And he's standing at the door, and he's waiting, and he's waiting, and he's waiting. And this is a congregation that's typically about 100 to 150 people. And it's 8:50, and nobody's there. And it's 8:55, and nobody's there. And it's 9 o'clock. And at 9 o'clock, one truck comes rolling into the driveway and into the parking lot, and it's an old truck, and it parks, and one gentleman gets out. And he's dressed in his overalls, and the preacher's standing there at the door, and he welcomes him. He says, hello, sir. And the gentleman walks in, he says, hey, preacher, how you doing? I'm fine, I'm fine. Man walks up, he sits on the front pew, and he's ready to go. And the preacher is beside himself. He's prepared, and he's prepared, and he's prepared. He has a 2-hour sermon to get ready, to deliver. And he goes, well, what am I going to do? So he walks up to the farmer, and he says, I don't really know. I've never been in this situation before, but I have this sermon that I've prepared, and you're the only one here, and I'm wondering if maybe we should just wait and do this next week, or what do you think we should do? And the farmer says, well, you know, I'm not a preacher. Don't know much about preaching. I'm a farmer. I feed cows. And you know, if one cow showed up, I think I'd feed him. Good enough. So the preacher gets up into the pulpit, and he delivers with passion from the bottom of his heart, with everything he had, 2 hours of fire and brimstone and grace and hope. And the farmer sits there and takes it all. The preacher finishes, he comes down, he goes, well, how did I do? The farmer says, well, I'm not a preacher. I don't know much about preaching. I'm a farmer. I feed cows. But I do know that if one cow showed up, I don't think I'd feed him the whole silo. So, I have about a 4-hour piece that I have tried to condense into about 10 minutes. So we'll see how it goes. Kathy already shared the scripture beautifully. You know, the story of the gentleman on the road to Emmaus, and they are walking along and they're discussing what had just happened in Jerusalem. And if you can imagine, these are folks they were filled with hope just days before that Israel was going to be free, that they were going to be released from the bondage that they were in, that they were no longer going to have to be subject to Rome. They were filled with hope that change was coming. I'm not going to go there. I was thinking about 8 years ago, but hope, change, never mind. But you have to wonder the despair and the fear that they were experiencing. Everything that they had hoped for had been crushed. That hope of victory, that hope of restoring Israel to its greatness as a nation was gone. And I want you to imagine and think about the fear that must have been inside of them and the despair as they're walking along the road. And that's what I want to spend time on this morning. I want to talk a little bit about fear and what fear does to us as believers or as humans. And we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about how the brain works and how fear works. And then we're going to talk about how do we combat that as believers? And how do we deal with it? How do we overcome our fear? So the first thing I see in this whole story is that fear blinds us from the truth. You know, here we have two guys who are walking along the road, and Jesus walks up beside them, and they don't even see it. They don't even know who's next to them. Jesus is the truth. He says, I am the truth. He's walking alongside of them in the flesh. And they don't even know who he is. They're overcome by despair and by fear that they can't even see what is directly in front of them. Fear causes us to lose hope. One of the things that they say is, but we had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. Not we have hope, not we are hoping. We had hope. Fear and despair had caused them to lose the hope that they had just had just a few days earlier. Fear blinds us from the truth. Fear causes us to lose hope. And fear causes us to be consumed with the future of what ifs. Fear is barely based on what is going on in the here and now. It's usually looking forward. Well, what if this? Well, what if? Well, what if? So let's look a little bit at the brain, and a lot of people don't know even the physiology of what happens when we find ourselves in a state of fear. The brain, you know, thousands of years ago, we have cavemen, right? Cavemen. I know. The amygdala, part of the brain, the amygdala, is designed for fight or flight. So cavemen, thousands of years ago, encounter saber-toothed tiger. Fear kicks in. When fear kicks in, the amygdala kicks in. It fires. It releases adrenaline. You know, the lymphatic system begins to put into play. It releases adrenaline, and boom, you instantly have this ability to deal with the danger that is in front of you. So caveman encounters saber-toothed tiger. Lymphatic system kicks in. Amygdala fires. Fight. Boom. Kill saber-toothed tiger. Everything done. And goes back to sleep for 12 to 15 hours. And the system returns to the way it's supposed to be. So, fast forward, modern day. No cavemen. No saber-toothed tiger. No. Our fears today are more abstract. We have them constantly bombarding us. What if I can't pay my bills? What if I can't pay the rent? What if they turn off my electricity? What if she doesn't like me? What if my kid dies in a car accident? What if? And we live in a constant state where the amygdala is firing. Constantly. And if we don't find a way to deal with those fears and those what ifs, It leads to things like chronic disease because that adrenaline constantly releasing, the amygdala constantly firing. We live in a state of fear. What ifs? All the time. The media. How many times can you turn on the news and not hear something that is trying to deliver a fear-based message? Whether you turn on CNN or Fox News, it doesn't matter. It's all about the fear of the what ifs. What's going on in the Middle East? What's going on with Korea? What's going on in Russia? You know, what's the latest illness that we're all going to catch and die? Constant fear, 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 fear. And if we don't learn to take ourselves out of that, we're just like the rest of the world. And we get stuck. So there's something in our brain called the frontal lobe. And 8 or 9 years ago, they did research, and they found that we have about a quarter of a second between the time that the amygdala gets that message of fear and needs to kick in, and when it actually kicks in. So we have about a quarter of a second from the time we get that thought of fear or what if to be able to change what's going on in our brain. Well, a quarter of a second. How many of you can act in a quarter of a second? Not me. I'm fast, but I'm not that fast. So the cool thing is that God has given us the ability as human beings. Nothing else on the planet can do this. We have the ability as human beings to choose our thoughts. And in choosing our thoughts, we can actually physiologically change what is going on in our body. It is scientifically proven. We have been given the gift to be able to pick what we think. And what we think determines what goes on inside. You're like, Sean, why are you spending time on all this science? This is church. We should be talking about Jesus, right? But this is the practical side of it. That as believers, we don't have to live in that state of fear. We don't have to subscribe to what the world sees. We don't have to live in the what if, what if, what if. You know, chronic fear is anxiety. We don't have to be an anxious people. We don't have to live in that state of anxiety. We can choose to change that state. So how do we overcome fear? 4 quick things, and then we'll be done. It is scientifically proven that the brain is unable to process fear and gratitude at the same time. Your brain cannot be in a state of fear and a state of gratitude at the same time. It is physically impossible. They've done MRIs and MRAs to study what the brain looks like and what happens when a person is fearful and when a person comes from a place of gratitude. And it is physically impossible for the brain to be in those 2 places at the same time. Impossible. So what's the first thing we need to do? We need to sow seeds of gratitude. We need to be grateful. We don't need to live in the future. We don't need to live in the past. We need to live in the present, and we need to live with gratitude. And we think, how do we do that? How do I live? How do I sow seeds of gratitude? It starts by being fully present where you are. It starts by thinking not about what's 10 minutes down the road, not about what's tomorrow, not about what is next week, not about the what ifs of what's going to happen later. It starts with being in the now, practicing being in the now and sowing seeds of gratitude. It's as simple as, Father, thank you for the faith community you have brought me to. In this moment, thank you for your word. Thank you for the roof over my head. Thank you for the friends you have put in my life. Sowing seeds of gratitude. Communicate gratitude. You know, if you want to be in a state of gratitude, communicate to people around you how grateful you are for them. Kathy, I am so grateful for the message that you bring to these kids. I'm so grateful to be a part of this community. Sowing seeds of gratitude, living in the moment. I already talked about this. Living in the moment. Train yourself to live in the moment. Stop obsessing what's going to happen tomorrow. Stop obsessing about what other people think about me. Live in the now. Live in the moment. Self-disclosure. Find somebody close to you that you can be honest with. We call it accountability. We call it self-disclosure, whatever you want to call it. Find a true friend that you can be honest with. And when you are in the midst of that fear, be open. Be honest about it. And this part is key. Last point. Connect with Christ. In the scripture it says that when he sat down, he broke bread and gave thanks. At that point, when they communed with Christ, when they entered into community, when they sat down at a meal, when they spent time, at that moment, their eyes were opened. Our eyes are opened to hope when we spend time communing with Christ. So that means in a community of believers. That means spending time throughout your week in gratitude and communing with Christ. Well, how do I do that? That's weird. That's funny. That's strange. It's as simple as when you're sitting at the stoplight saying, Father, thank you for directing me. Thank you for providing for me. It's not you have to get up 3 hours early and spend 6 hours in Scripture every day and learn the entire book of Job. It's not that nonsense. It is as simple as when I look at Andrea and say, Andrea, I love the friendship that I have with you. It's as simple as saying, God, I am so thankful. I love the relationship that I have with you. How do we overcome fear? Sowing seeds of gratitude, living in the moment, self-disclosure, connecting with Christ. My challenge to you is that this week, as you hear those thoughts of, what if? Well, what if this? Well, what if we get attacked? Well, what if my kid's in a car accident? What if I lose my job? What if the stock market crashes? When you hear those what ifs, I challenge you to stop. Live in the moment. Begin to develop an attitude of gratitude and spend some time with Christ. I promise it will change your life.